Chapter 1, Critical Thinking. Section 3, Formal Logic and Truth Tables. Do computers think? The negation of a statement is the assertion that means the opposite of the original statement. P is he likes dogs, not P, he does not like dogs. By definition, the negation of a true statement is false, and the negation of a false statement is true. Here we have a truth table. P takes on two values, true or false. And not P takes the opposite value of P. So not P takes values false and true. The negation of P is false when P is true, and negation of P is true when P is false. The conjunction of two statements is the assertion that both are true. We'll use the symbol AND to denote conjunction. Assume that P is baseball is 90% mental, and Q is the other half of baseball is physical. The conjunction is P and Q. Baseball is 90% mental, and the other half is physical. The truth table for the conjunction P and Q is given here. P and Q is true when P is true and Q is true. That's the first line of a table, right? So this is the only time when P and Q is true when both P, Q are true. In all other cases, P and Q is false. P and Q is false when P is true and Q is false. P and Q is false when P is false and Q is true. P and Q is false when P is false and Q is false. The only time P and Q is true is when both P, Q are true. Four different cases in the conjunction truth table. A fever, so the true conjunction, a fever may accompany a cold, and headache may accompany a cold. Notice that a fever may accompany a cold is true. A headache may accompany a cold is also true. Therefore, conjunction is a true statement. A false conjunction. You're required to pay income tax, and pigs often fly. It is true that you are required to pay income tax. It is false that pigs often fly. The conjunction, therefore, is false. False conjunction. Aspirin cures cancer, and water is wet. It is false that aspirin cures cancer, and it is true that water is wet. The conjunction is false. Another false conjunction. The president's policies are always best for America, and Congress never passes an unwise bill. The president's policies are always best for America is false. Congress never passes an unwise bill is also false. The conjunction is false. Example. In the past, many health insurance policies did not cover pre-existing conditions. They did not cover illness that existed prior to the purchase of the policy. A salesman for such a policy stated, "If you buy this policy, it will cover cases of flu in your family next winter, and it will cover treatment for your wife's chronic arthritis." Was the salesman telling the truth? The policy did not cover the pre-existing arthritic condition, so that part of a conjunction was not true. Conjunctions are true only when both parts are true. The salesman did not speak truthfully. The insurance will cover cases of flu in your family next winter, and it will never cover treatment for your wife's chronic arthritis is a false statement. The disjunction of two statements is the assertion that either one or the other is true, or possibly both. Compare this with a conjunction where both statements must be true. We will use the symbol OR to denote disjunction. Example. Assume that P is this medication may cause dizziness, and Q is this medication may cause fatigue. The disjunction is P or Q. The medication may cause dizziness or fatigue. In mathematics and logic, the word OR is always used in the inclusive, one or the other, or possibly both. Here is a truth table. Notice that the only time the disjunction is false when both P is false and Q is false. All other times, the disjunction is true. P or Q is true when P is true and Q is true. P or Q is true when P is true and Q is false. P or Q is true when P is false and Q is true. P or Q is false when P is false and Q is false. Here are the 4 different cases in the disjunction truth table. A true disjunction. A fever may accompany a cold, or a headache may accompany a cold. It is true that fever may accompany a cold, and it is true that a headache may accompany a cold. Therefore, the disjunction is also true. A true disjunction. You are required to pay income tax, or pigs often fly. It is true that you are required to pay income tax. It is false that pigs often fly. The disjunction is true. Another true disjunction. Aspirin cures cancer, or water is wet. It is false that aspirin cures cancer. It is true that water is wet. The disjunction is true. A false disjunction. The president policies are always best for America, or Congress never passes an unwise bill. It is false that president's policies are always best for America, and it is false that Congress never passes an unwise bill. The disjunction is false. This is an example of inclusive and exclusive or. In my favorite restaurant, the waiter asks if I want butter or sour cream on my baked potato. Is this the inclusive or exclusive or? His statement surely means that you can have butter, sour cream, or both. Therefore, it's the inclusive or. Implication. A statement of the form, if P then Q, is called an implication or a conditional statement. We use the same terminology as in the preceding section. P is called the premise and Q is called the conclusion. We denote P implies Q. Example. Assume that P is your average is 90% or more, and Q, you get an A for the course. The conditional is P implies Q. If your average is 90% or above, then you get an A for the course. The premise, your average is 90% or above, and the conclusion, you get an A for the course. The truth table for the conditional statement. Notice that the conditional statement is false only when true implies false. Right, so P is true, Q is false, the implication is false. In all other cases, P implies Q is true. P implies Q is true when P is true and Q is true. P implies Q is false when P is true and Q is false. P implies Q is true when P is false and Q is true. P implies Q is true when P is false and Q is false. Here are 4 different cases in the conditional truth table. A true conditional. If Earth is spherical, then you go from Spain to Japan by traveling west. It is true that Earth is spherical, and it is true that you go from Spain to Japan by traveling west. Therefore, the conditional is true. False conditional. If the moon orbits Earth, then the moon is a planet. The moon orbits Earth is true. The moon is a planet is false. Therefore, the conditional is false. True conditional. If Earth is a planet nearest to the Sun, then Earth orbits the Sun once each year. Earth is a planet nearest to the Sun is false. Earth orbits the Sun once each year is true. The conditional is true. Another true conditional. If Earth is a planet farthest from the Sun, then the moon is made of green cheese. It is not the case that Earth is the planet farthest from the Sun, and it's also false that the moon is made of green cheese. This is a true conditional.